Ulysses Jackson, welcome to the Undraped Artist podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, man. It's this is a new experience. I haven't had a formulator, a paint formulator. Is that what I would call you?
That is correct. Yeah, I'm the director of research and development for Golden Artist Colors, but my main job is formulation of products, developing new products.
So how'd you get into that? I read a little bit on the website, on the Golden website. It said that you're a professional artist and you do this. How did you, first of all, how'd you become a scientist and a professional artist?
Yeah.
That's kind of a huge deal.
That's a longer story, but the really abbreviated version is when I was a kid, I was really in love with chemistry. I had a home lab in the basement.
No joke.
Yeah. My grandfather, he had to break down his lab. And then all the stuff kind of came my way. And so I had a lab in the basement. And I thought that was something I'd wanted to do. But then when I went through standard school, it wasn't really taught in a way that was exciting to me. So I went off in other directions, more creative. Got recruited to college for music, switched to painting. Painted a lot.
Heck? How many interests do you have, man?
Oh, so many. That's broad. When I graduated college, I did well. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And so I took
what'd you graduate in? In music?
I got my degree in fine arts and painting.
Oh, in fine. Okay. Sorry. So you went from music to fine art.
All over the place. Yeah. Switched over. Yeah. So I did well, but I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. At that time, I was working in an acoustics engineering lab. Which was, I could have gone into that full time. I was doing music production, a lot of music for film, but it just felt like I needed to explore more. So I took a long.
Wait a minute, hold on, back up. So were you in any films we would know?
I was never in any films. I was doing.
No, I mean your music. Right. Was your music in any films we would know?
Nothing to that level, mostly more documentaries and
okay.
What you would have been doing to build a reel to move up the chain.
Right. Gotcha.
And so, on the road, I stopped in at every contact I could, basically crash on the couch. And so one of my stops was actually with the Goldens in upstate New York. In the fall, I just kind of showed up after camping and said, I'm here. They, gave me a great dinner. I got to take a shower. And the next day, they took me on a tour of the factory. And it was amazingly weird. Like everyone was super happy to be working in a paint factory, and it made an impression on me. So I kept traveling. About a year and a half later, I just put in a resume on a lark saying, here's who I am. Here's my weird skill set. What do you have available? And they started me as an entry-level lab tech. And soon after, I went to my boss at the time, Jim Hayes, and said, if I want to be you someday, what book should I start reading? And so he handed me the first book, read that in a week. I said, what next? And expanded my chemistry knowledge, built another home lab. Now I have a home lab as an adult, do chemistry for fun.
So you're a self-taught chemist, essentially.
I'm a self-taught chemist, but considered really good at it. So
wow. That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, you hear that all the time with artists, but you don't hear it with scientists very often.
It's pretty niche, very different properties. But if you're good with shapes, most of the chemistry I play with is organic chemistry. And so you have these molecules. If you visualize your classical kind of molecule shape, they're like Legos, and they have different qualities. They move this way, and it's like a composition. So you can pretty quickly, if you have good shape recognition, understand, okay, this part is more active than this part. If I react these things together, this is the kinetic mechanism. And
you're way over my head right now.
Pretty fun. So anyways, so I've been doing this role now for 20 years. I've been with Golden 20 years, and I run the lab. I have 4 formulators on my team, and we develop products. So, we think of what something like you might need as an artist that we don't already make, or how is something we're already making, could we improve that in some way? And we'll set up the trials to do just that.
So, what is a day like for you at Golden? I'm trying to imagine, because it seems like paint is paint. I mean, I know it's not, and that's what I'm hoping to learn from you a little bit.
Okay,
But
sure.
it's like paint's been around for a lot of years, hundreds of
Sure.
years. What is left to even make?
Okay.
So what do you do from day to day?
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic question. So, and it means that overall we're doing a great job, because, we think that paint just should work for the artist, right? You should be able to grab a tube at the store, open it up, or have a tube in your studio, open it up, use it, and it should just work. I often joke that if I'm getting calls, something's messed up, right? That
Yeah.
somehow something's off, something didn't work right. And I prefer to avoid those. I'd much rather have happy artists. Interacting with happy artists is way more fun. So behind the scenes in that jar, you have lots of interactions. All the ingredients are hanging out. The analogy I often use is, if you think of each paint ingredient as a personality, you're starting a party, and you can have a party that starts off great and then it turns into a brawl, or you can have a party where everyone wants to hang out forever and it's just, like friends you've had, your lifelong friends. So if you have one ingredient that's being a bully, it can set everything else off, and you could get, a jar that maybe changes in feel, that's in a way that you wouldn't expect. So, we stand behind our products. We believe that our product should be stable. It's one of the reasons you're paying for the quality of Golden. Is we want you to have a product in your studio and just know, if you go back to it every day, every year, 10 years later, it should still perform. And if not, call the tech support line and they'd want to understand more about what's going on. So that
Hmm.
stability is actually really nuanced, to make sure that you don't have something solidifying, to make sure you don't have separation, to make sure that, you know, unforeseen things, like artists will dip their brushes in some really funky water sometimes and then dump it right into a jar of gel. Make sure that that doesn't spoil. It's really nuanced stuff.
So how do you test in the short term what you're really, when you're looking for long-term answers? Like you had said, you want to be able to open this tube up in 10 years and it's still fluid and still usable. How in the world do you test that? You've only been working there 20 years. Like that seems
Yeah,
hard
I
to
mean,
test.
we do go back and look at real life samples, right? So that's the ultimate test, is how, a product 20 years ago, is it still good when we open that jar? To accelerate that, we will try to parallel that with different stressors. So for every, product, there's a large array of tests that we would do. But for like the stability one in particular, generally we use an oven that's at a warm temperature. It's not like you're cooking something in there. It's like about 140 degrees Fahrenheit, 60 degrees Celsius. And we found that if paint can be good as new in a month or 2 months in that system, in that elevated temperature, odds are it's going to be fine on the shelf moving forward.
Oh.
So when we're developing a product, we'll run it first in the lab. Our trials will, I jokingly say it's like starting off with dynamite, ending up at the eye doctor. So we say, first we have this idea for whatever, will it stick? And then at the end, is this better? Is that better? Is this better? Is that better? And we might do, many iterations to look for those refinements, those subtle things that maybe an artist doing a specific technique needs to see. Each one of those changes could have other ramifications. So we'll take all of those tests, we'll run them through the oven, make sure the paint party's going good as we started. And then when we finally feel confident in a formulation that goes out to production, every batch that's made also gets run through the same heat aging test to hopefully, say something happened in production, say someone even up the chain sent the wrong raw material labeled a certain way, we would catch
Mm-hmm.
that before it got out into the field. And like I say, if something does get out there, we would want to talk with whoever received something not to their liking and understand, because once again, we just want happy artists.
Right. So, what are the products you work in? What mediums?
So Golden makes, we're known for acrylics, right? So we make many different lines of acrylic, heavy body, fluid, high flow, open, so flat.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have a line of oil paints, the Williamsburg handmade oils. Then we have a line of watercolor, the core watercolor. And then we recently, about a year and a half, 2 years ago, acquired a company called Pan Pastel, which is a
Oh, you own
dry.
them now?
Yeah, we acquired Pan Pastel from Ladd and Burney and have a fantastic relationship with them. We feel like the right stewards of that company and are thrilled to have that additional offering, uh, to expand what artists can do.
Yeah. Does that fit nicely into your product line? I mean, is there as much chemistry in Pan Pastel as there is in the other work you're doing? It seems more
Well,
straightforward.
there's, so less as far as, because it's dry, right? It's a
Right.
dry material. You're not worried about, those other aspects. But in the things that Pan Pastel needs to do, there's stuff behind the scenes, right? So,
Really?
say you're an artist who has a Pan Pastel and you accidentally drop it, or maybe someone ships it not great. We're trying to minimize that cracking.
Okay.
So, it's the balances between the storage qualities, the color qualities, the light fastness qualities, but also that feel under the tool, the takeoff, the pickup, all of those subtle attributes that a pastel artist would want for large veils of color, and that kind of, even though it's a dry material, that wet feel, that really luscious feel. Um, so when we're developing some new colors, um, it's important to make sure that it feels not only like the rest of the line, but also within that color, exciting for the artist.
Yeah. So there must be some kind of binder in it though, to hold it into that nice, flat, smooth sort of makeup. I don't know how else to describe it. It feels like eyeshadow or something when
Yeah, I mean, there's that gets into proprietary top secret stuff. I'd say of
Gotcha.
all the products we make, Pan Pastel is the one we're most tight-lipped on composition,
Right.
just because it it is such a unique product. Um,
Yeah.
and so, really, what we focus on is anything we use in there. It's archival stability, how it does in UV chambers. So we have chambers that accelerate aging with light to kind of simulate a museum condition. And
Really?
so, yeah, so we can do about 16 and change days in a chamber, gives a suntan that would be equivalent to around 100 years in a museum.
Get
And
out of
so,
town. Really?
yeah, no, it's a fascinating way to be able to understand how materials shift.
Is that mostly just blasting it with UV, just UV alone? Or is there more to the light that you're
We have different
exposing it to?
chambers depending on what we want to do. So the Xenon Art Chamber is simulating light through glass in a museum intensity. We have other
Through what
chambers.
kind of glass? Just clear
It'd be window,
glass?
yeah, window pane glass.
So
Yeah,
nothing special, no museum glass, no UV glass, just plain old glass.
right. So if you
Okay.
imagine the sun's projecting a certain spectrum,
Yeah.
glass itself filters out a substantial amount of UV portion.
Even just straight up glass
Yeah.
does.
So
Oh,
you
I didn't
have,
know that.
you have, there's UV A, B, and C. UVC is mostly captured by the atmosphere, fortunately, because that would be bad if it got to us. So you have mostly A and B coming to Earth. And right now I'm blanking which one is blocked by the glass.
Just lie about it. I wouldn't know the difference.
Yeah, I'm not one to lie.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Um, yeah.
My
So
the
just
listeners
blanking it right
might call you out.
now. Yeah. So basically, standard window glass blocks out, I believe it's in the high 80 percentile of one of them, and then the rest of it makes it through to the surface of the painting or drawing or what have you. And so by having a chamber that's projecting a spectrum similar to the sun through a glass similar to a window pane, then you can get a really good understanding of what it might look like in those conditions. Keep in mind, museums are traditionally very dark spaces. So these tests were designed around lower intensity lighting,
Yeah.
where bright, sunny room, a more contemporary environment might have a much more intensity, a higher lux than the testing of the chamber. But it gives you a really great sense of how things do.
Yeah, but you're also testing for 100 years. So that's a long time.
It is a long time.
Yeah.
Usually when you see a change, you'll see it much sooner, theoretically. So where I like, you say I have two pigments I'm picking between, right?
Yeah.
We'll test them all in the chamber. And if one shows no change and one shows some change, I'll just go with the one that shows no change because I just know in the same stressors it's better. Those chambers are still theoretical. What the paint will really do in 100 years might be far less change than what we're even seeing, because it's kind of, it's really a continual blasting. You're trying to speed things up.
Yeah.
So it was developed by basically the traditional pigment alizarin crimson, organic material from the madder plant. It was used in painting for a long time, and they looked at known samples. Say this portrait had alizarin crimson applied 100 years ago. How long would it take me to expose alizarin crimson in this chamber to equal it? So it's all based on that.
To equal 100 years, you mean?
Right. So
okay.
Yeah. So you just kind of have
I see what you're saying. So
this fading. Yeah.
Just to make sure I understand. So you know what alizarin crimson does in 100 years. So you take something that is essentially a sample of what happens in 100 years of alizarin crimson, and then you make that happen in your chamber, and then you can assume that if it took you 5 days in the chamber, then when you expose another paint for 5 days, it will also simulate 100 years.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly, you're trying to use the equivalent,
right?
To
okay.
draw some kind of understanding of what a material might do.
Right. So what is it that makes paint fade? Do you know? Does anyone even know that?
Oh, sure. It's usually a weakness in the pigment molecule itself. So generally speaking, rocks or minerals don't fade a lot, right? You pick up a stone, you put it out in the environment, it's pretty durable. The sun's hammering on it, it doesn't break down. When you start getting into organic molecules, you have these carbons that are linked together in those shapes, some people jokingly call it chicken wire structures. They are being held together with a certain amount of energy within themselves. When that UV energy comes in, it's hitting a portion of that. If it hits it harder than the part holding it together, it can blast it apart. And so there's certain parts of the molecule that are weaker than others. And so if it's hitting it gently enough, say the structure is strong, it'll just rattle around, generate the heat and excite, and it also gives off color that we see. If it hits it harder, it can actually break those intermolecular bonds and then remove a colored site called a chromophore and, in essence, bleach the molecule. So when you have a pigment particle, you have these large kind of crystal-like materials of these organic molecules, and the UV is coming in and bombarding them. So the analogy I know I've used in other places is, if UV energy is a hammer and it's hitting at a certain force, if you have a boulder and you hit it with that hammer, it just bounces off with a little sound. If you have pea gravel of the same material, it'll smash it, even though it's the same force. It's just you have a much smaller portion of material. So when you start to see fading, you might have either a molecule that has points of weakness that the UV can break apart, or oxygen UV can also do things, or you have too small of a particle size. So sometimes now pigments are getting ground by manufacturers to like tiny, tiny portions where it gives you tons of tint strength, but it might affect your UV. So you
Really?
have a balance between the size of your pigment as well as the chemical composition of that pigment.
This episode is brought to you in part by Rosemary Brushes. If you're one of my listeners who's a professional artist, you're already using Rosemary brushes. But for the rest of you, come on, take your work a little more seriously. Stop buying the other brands. It's just not worth it. Every now and then you may get lucky and buy a good brush from another brand, but use the brand that professionals like myself are using. Go to rosemaryandco.com, link in the description or the show notes, and get yourself some quality brushes before your next painting. Oh my gosh. Yeah, there's a lot that goes into this. So if I were to mix my own paints, it's not a trivial thing. If I overgrind them, then I could essentially ruin the paint.
Well, you'd have to be really, really strong.
Oh,
So
okay.
that's not going to be within the realm of a normal human to overgrind it. Usually when you're talking about overgrinding, you're using something called a media mill, which is like a long tunnel, lots of grinding interactions, going down to, these kind of almost, not quite nano, but near nano particle size.
So they're machine ground.
Oh yeah. Yeah. When you're
So-
starting to go,
What, don't these other companies know what they're doing?
well,
I mean,
I'd
you don't have to
say
specifically.
It runs the gamut. It runs the
Right.
gamut. There's within any industry, you have people dedicated to different attributes. So I love working for Golden that we are quality first. We think, how can we make it better? And if we in the lab can show this unequivocally makes it better, even if it maybe costs more, we'll move in that direction because we really care about that aspect of what we do. Everything is around quality. You have other manufacturers who might be interested in purely economics, right? So it might be if say a manufacturer gets a really finely ground dispersion, it has a lot more tint strength, so maybe you use less of it, something like that. And so you're not maybe balancing those attributes, or even sometimes not testing for it. So certain manufacturers might even not have the facilities to test for it. They might be, say, a scrappy startup, totally cool. They might just put something in a window and use that. And they might be a young company, so they only have 1 year of window exposure, which would be, a very short exposure versus a chamber. So you might not be able to see that far in advance. Right.
Okay, I have a question. I've often wondered this. Why do some paints dry faster than others?
Okay, well, first let's talk about what system we're in.
Oil.
Oil. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, oil. Yeah. That's all I do is oil. Yeah.
Okay, that really helps me. Yeah.
Okay. Although I'm curious about the others too, though. I mean, but oil, it's like titanium white, right? Why does titanium white take so long to dry versus lead white, for example?
Sure. So, oil paint's really cool in that, if you think of acrylic paints more like a stew where you have all these different ingredients doing different things. Oil paint's more like bread where you have very simple ingredients, and out of the same ingredients in bread, you can make a baguette, you can make a croissant, you can make a French loaf or whatever. And so what's cool about oil paint is in the processing, that's where the subtlety comes in, right? It's like a master baker versus like, someone who's just making bread during the pandemic, right? As far as the drying goes, so oil paint dries by drawing in oxygen, right? So there's sites in the linseed oil that reach out and grab one another and they lock in. And that's what the drying is as that locks out, those chains of linseed oil grow into longer polymers. It builds in viscosity. At a certain point, it stops moving. It's dry. Different compounds can preferentially draw oxygen in or orient oxygen to where it's more available for the linseed oil. So in like a lot of earth colors, you might have a little bit of manganese, which acts like a dryer. So you probably, sometimes people buy like a Japan dryer or a little cobalt manganese dryer to add to their paints, and a touch will accelerate that oxygen uptake because it's orienting the oxygen to where it's available for the
Can you give me a
painting.
little? I'm sorry, I'm a very curious person.
Yeah.
And if I start to step out of your expertise, just stop me. But
Yeah.
I don't understand that. How does a molecule attract oxygen more than another molecule? What exactly is it doing?
So that's a little more complex, but
Yeah.
if you can imagine, like in our blood, we have hemoglobin, right? So you have a little iron ion in this molecule, and it's just designed to grab oxygen, hold on to it until you go through your system, and then your body takes it off, and it turns
Okay.
back, and then it gets oxygen. And we breathe in oxygen, we breathe out CO2. Is basically an oriented reaction where that
Okay.
iron is being held to where it can't really do what it wants to do, which is rust. It's not quite there. It's like stabilized somewhat. And then it gives a portion where it wants to just reach out and grab because it's trying to rust per se,
Oh,
right?
okay.
Trying to oxidize. Um, and I'm trying to simplify things also,
No, but
right?
this is helpful. Yeah.
And so if you have, say you have either a free metal in a system or an ion that's more migratory, it kind of does the same thing where it's maybe trying to stabilize with some oxygen, but because that's, here, then it just happens to orient better with the double bonds on the chain and speed up a reaction.
Okay. That's helpful. Yeah, that makes
It's
sense.
useful to artists. So maybe let's extend that out to where it's useful to an artist. If you have a slow drying paint, like say titanium white, but you mix it with a tiny bit of a fast drying paint, it doesn't have to be a substantial color shift, just a tint of something fast drying. So say you have titanium white and a tiny bit of natural raw umber, that will activate the whole system. It gives a kinetic site where the reaction starts and it just propagates out through much faster.
Hmm.
Also, sunlight makes things go faster because it's increasing the energy in the system. And so we've done some research, you can read about it on Just Paint, about if you have an oil painting in a dark closet versus out in the sun, one won't dry um, sometimes for a very long time, and one will dry very quickly. And that's because you're putting energy into the system and
Is it
helping
light
things.
energy or heat energy?
In that case, it's light energy. A little bit of heat also speeds up reactions. Generally, chemical reactions go faster in warmer conditions, slower in cold conditions. And uh, light energy happens to conveniently interact with the part of the linseed oil that dries. And
Hmm.
so you can get a huge effect, even with a very subtle light. You know, a
Hmm.
little bit of UV portion does a whole bunch of kicking things over. So you can use it both ways. If you want to say you're working on a portrait, your session ended for the day, and maybe you don't want it to dry as fast, you know, turn it to a wall or get it in a dark space until you bring it back. And that will
Hmm.
actually slow things down, which, depending on what you're doing, could be a useful tip or trick.
I tried an experiment once, and I'm wondering if I did it wrong because it seems like, based on what you're saying, it should have worked. And I put titanium white in a vacuum bag and then just a sealed container that's not vacuum sealed and then just open. And I put them all on the same counter. And I mean, I only did this experiment once, but they all dried at the same rate. And I thought for sure the one in the vacuum bag, since I pulled out all the air and all the oxygen with it, that it wouldn't dry. Maybe, and you know, and as I'm telling you this, I'm feeling like maybe this isn't fair because maybe I did it wrong or there's some, but is
Yeah, I
it
mean, some plastics are still permeable to oxygen, so I don't know
okay?
about
So
the
maybe,
vacuum bag material, the composition.
so
Um,
theoretically, if I could get a true vacuum, paint wouldn't dry.
yeah, I don't even think you need to go that far. You need more of a vapor barrier, right? So if you imagine oil paints put in metal tubes all day long, we're not putting a vacuum on the back of it or purging it with inert gas before we crimp it. There's just not air in the system. And so recently,
Right, but if I wanted, so the reason I was doing this experiment, now I'm giving away potential, you know, future creation ideas here, but so I was creating something where I could put my palette. It was a tray that would have been vacuum sealed that I could put my palette in and just have it vacuum sealed at the end of the day. Because oftentimes I'll go a week without painting for various reasons. Then I come
okay,
back and all my paint's dry. So I thought, oh, I'll create this vacuum sealed container and there would be no way the paint would dry. So then I just did an experiment with like a vacuum bag and I was like, oh, it didn't work. Okay. And then I went on to my other experiment, you know, inventions or
yeah,
whatever. So I just kind of
yeah,
let that one go because I thought maybe I misunderstood the principle. But so anyway, that's why. But I get with the tube because a tube you lock out all the air. There's no air. It's right up
right,
against the wall of the tube, right up against the lid. There's no
yeah,
air there to draw oxygen out of. But on a pallet in a box, you know, you got a lot of air in there.
a little more tricky. So,
Yeah.
I'm gonna Golden has an artist in residency program that also I highly recommend everyone should apply to it. It's the Samandello Golden Foundation for the Arts, so it's technically different from Golden, but
Yeah.
we cross the street, right? And so we interact a lot with the artists over there. It's one of the perks of going to the residency is it's like all you can paint buffet, and you get to interact with the technical staff. So, anyways, everyone should apply. Check it out at the
That sounds
Samandello
awesome.
Foundation for the Arts. It's amazing. We get a lot of applicants per year. I love it. The last session, we had a painter, oil painter, who taught me a trick. And I said, can I share this? Because it seems like everyone should know this trick and it's so simple. They mix up colors on their palette. They take just standard aluminum foil. They make a little envelope that they close up portions of that color in an envelope. And instead of it being in a tube where you have to put in a tube, it's just a little envelope that they label and it keeps the paint wet.
Because
And
it
it's so
keeps all the
simple.
air out. It's
It's just like
essentially,
a tube, right?
it's just like a
It's
tube.
and then
Yeah.
the next time they want to come paint, they just unroll all the envelopes and it's
What a
available.
mess, though. I still want to make my container.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's a mess.
It's a
Yeah,
mess.
I
It is
mean,
a good idea, though. I got to give him
I'll
that.
I'll tell you what I've done in my studio. So this is now painter hat on,
Yeah.
switching off from golden hat. I have a designated mini freezer, like a
Yeah. I used to
little,
do that. Yeah.
yeah. And I use my palette is the little basil boxes you can get with, whenever I cook Thai food or whatever, I buy the little box of basil at the store. And it's
Okay.
this little rectangle plastic palette. I use that as my palette and I throw it in a designated freezer. No food meets paint in my world. I just,
No, I used to throw it in my actual freezer, and
yeah,
now all my
that's not a
food would
good idea.
taste like paint.
It's just not a good idea to have
Yeah.
those strings crossed. So I have the rule that if it comes into my studio, it's a one-way street.
Yeah.
So sometimes that
Yeah.
spatula, you're like, that's just the right tool, only into the studio, never back from it. But
Right.
that works great for me.
So, what is it about the
Because
cold? Is it the dark or the cold?
it's most of the cold. So you've slowed down those kinetics so slow that the reactions can occur.
Oh, okay.
And it will give you quite some time. There
Yeah.
still is some oxygen in there, but it'll give you quite some time. Um,
Hmm.
is it better to put out fresh paint every day? Absolutely.
Right.
Conservation science would say, you know, that's the best
Oh,
you can do.
why is that?
Because you don't have partially polymerized, it's not partially drying before you use it. It's drying in situ.
Okay.
Um, But we also know artists, since oil paint's been around, have used oil paint at various stages on their palette.
Oh yeah, I was digging away at a half-dry clump of paint yesterday.
Yeah, the reality is artists are going to do what artists are going to do. We'll just try to make our best recommendations
Right.
for success. And people can get, really hung up in the details and almost become afraid of painting. Or, you have to get to that aesthetic sense.
Right.
Really important, right?
Right. So you'd said earlier that acrylic is much more complicated. There's a lot more ingredients that go into it. Why is
I
it?
don't know that it would be more complicated. Well, different complications. Let's just say they're all complicated.
Yeah.
Different complications. Yeah.
Well, I mean, oil paint's really simple. It's usually just linseed oil and dirt. Right?
On the most basic level, I mean, you certainly could make a paint out of that. And, if you're making paint yourself, that's fine. Generally, they'll be very long and ropey, might not feel great. And then if you put it into a container and stored it, you'd get really bad separation, and probably the pigment would crash out. And you'd get some unusable materials in the future. So,
so what else is in it then?
well, in Williamsburg, we are pretty upfront that we have basically as much pigment as possible. We have the alkali refined linseed oil. We have a tiny bit of wax to help stabilize the oil. And then we have some functional fillers, maybe some calcium carbonate or some Blanc Fix to stabilize it, to make it feel good, just enough to make it feel good. So it's really like French bread,
Feel good just to make it smooth, so not ropey and sticky.
So if you compare like a Williamsburg ultramarine blue to an ultramarine blue you would just make of purely pigment and oil, you would find one is very draggy and sticky and kind of not super fun to work with, and ours would just feel really good.
So man, in the olden days, back when paint was new, back in the early Renaissance, it was probably just the oil and the pigment, I would assume.
Yeah, I mean, it's an evolution, right? You come out of egg tempera. At a certain point, artists start adding increasingly more and more oil to give longer working times. At a certain point, the egg leaves, and then you have your pure oil paint. But that was usually made day of use by an assistant, right? Then someone figured out the kind of the bladder storage method. So they would make like a animal bladder and have the little stick that would act as like a cork, basically.
Yeah.
And then it allows them to store paint. And then it was up until more towards the Industrial Revolution, when the metal tube was created, that it became much more common to buy manufactured oil paint than made day of by yourself.
The reason I asked that, though, is did the old masters then have to deal with sort of sticky, ropey paint that we don't have to deal with today?
I mean, in the studies they certainly would add all kinds of stuff. Right?
Oh, they would.
Yeah. I mean, it's, I think, once you get into glazes, you're adding enough oil or medium to where that would go away, because you're not crowding the pigment particles next to each other, and they're not interacting that same way. But if you were painting with body paint, you would certainly experience that unless you maybe modified it a little bit. And there's various studies that have shown modifications of all kinds of materials.
Really?
Different chalks, different glass powders, different, it's artist experiment. And it's something amazing about that you're not happy as an artist with a feel or a look. You're going to try to find the material that will give you that feel and look. And if it's not on the market, we hope we can design it for you.
Yeah. So here's a question I've been wondering. So I talked to Ali Kavanaugh, who I know you guys work with. She's
Sure.
amazing.
Yeah.
And I think it was her actually. I might be mixing her up with somebody else, but I had said to whoever it was, you know, I love oil painting because of the translucency, and you can exploit that translucency to create more depth in your paintings by letting that translucency absorb light as opposed to the opacity in the lights that reflects light, more light. And whoever it was, I think it was her, but whoever it was, like, well, yeah, but acrylics have transparency too. And I thought, well, maybe, but I've never seen an acrylic with the same level of three-dimensionality that I've seen in, say, a Rembrandt, right? Is there, and maybe it's just I haven't been exposed to enough. Do you know from a scientific / artist perspective if there is a difference in the amount of depth you can create with acrylics versus oils? The illusion of depth. Obviously, it's just an illusion. I just have to take a minute to thank each one of my generous patrons for your part in keeping this podcast going. I could not continue to do it without you, so thank you so much. If you're not a patron yet, but you love the show and you listen regularly, please consider becoming a patron. It's really easy to do, and it doesn't have to break the bank. Just head over to theundrapedartist.com and click on the link Be My Patron on Podbean. And then choose a monthly donation amount that fits your budget. It's that simple.
Yeah, no, I mean, because acrylics have, in essence, better, the mediums we have for acrylics, the acrylic binders are, as far as artist materials, the least prone to color shift over time. They're not going to amber as much as a linseed oil. So a acrylic gel, after many years, will have some tone develop, but it might be where linseed oil started. So you can actually build a much thicker translucent layer of an acrylic for glazing than you could of an oil and maintain that transparency and mixing. I certainly have interacted with people who've painted with acrylics my whole life, and I've seen everything that you can imagine possible.
Really?
I even at one point was doing some Lucas Cranach copies in acrylic. I was calling them Cranach-offs. And I'm pretty confident that if the quote unquote old masters were working today, they would probably either work straight through acrylics or start in acrylics and finish in oil, because it does offer that versatility. That said, right now at home, I'm oil painting, but that's just because I'm enjoying oil painting. But yeah, I'd say, where oils will always top acrylics is oils, because of how they're made, you can fit a lot more pigment into the system. So if you're painting with body color opaquely, it will be color for color, more opaque and more pigmented, just because you can physically fit more pigment into it.
Wait. I got that mixed up. Into oil, you can fit more pigment?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And so there you have definitely, if you're trying to paint, and if you like brushstroke texture, oil paint is 100% solids. There's nothing that evaporates unless you add solvent to it. So what you make for your stroke, every little brush fiber will be seen if that's something you like. Acrylics, because there is evaporation and curing, there'll be some loss of texture just because that coating shrinks down as it dries, right? So there, between the two, as far as pigment level, pigment load, oil paints have acrylics beat. It's also one of the reasons that tube for tube, you're going to have a different economics generally between oil paints and acrylics. But when it comes to the ability to create luminous glazes, I think you can do remarkable things with both systems, but acrylics might actually have the edge on that one. I'd say that maybe in the way people use materials, they don't push that aspect just
Yeah, that
because
must be
that's
why I haven't
maybe,
seen it.
yeah. Or the inverse, what happened to me a lot when I would have, back when I was showing professionally as a painter, I would have a show and people would read the tags and come up and say, "Oh, I assume these were oils. How did you get that look in acrylics?" And so I think a lot of times maybe you see something without the tag and you say, "Oh,
That's an
you
oil.
assume it's something and
Yeah.
it might not be."
Hmm.
Yeah.
Now I'm gonna have to play around with that. I have played around with the acrylics you sent me, and they're really nice.
Oh,
Yeah.
cool. Yeah. I mean, I'd say for someone like you, if I was interacting, I like to, I prefer to interact with the artist one on one because, general advice doesn't let you get to what you want to do. But say I was interacting with someone like you who's a long time oil painter trying to convert you over to acrylics. The the first thing I would say is remember it can dry quick, so you can build up layers really quickly. So don't be as stressed about hitting it right the first time because you can just hit it with a hair dryer and come right back in and scumble things and do those techniques. Or if you want something slow drying, we make these acrylic glazing liquids that are slow drying glaze. You can work those for a nice session. Um, and then it will dry down and you can come back over. You can do 3, 4 layers of glaze in a day, where in an oil painting that might take you a week or two, depending on how, what mediums you're using. And then
Hmm.
finally, acrylics are affected dramatically by studio conditions. So say you're in a really hot, dry studio, get a humidifier going ahead of your session, get that humidity up in the space. If the air's got more moisture in it, the paint can't dry as fast. And there's some really amazing fine humidifiers now. You can just paint, you can put one literally pointing up between you and your painting and have this wet environment to where it's just wet until you
No
come in.
way.
Yeah, you can get
That's
some crazy stuff.
brilliant.
Yeah. So, and
Really?
it doesn't have to be a fancy one. You could go to your local, whatever, pharmacy store or store which would sell something like that, find, the $30 humidifier and get the cool moisture going, and it will keep things wet a long time. And then when you want it to dry, turn it off and lock it down. Hit it with a hair dryer if you want, and
Wow.
when that
So you
when
can keep
that
it
comes
wet long
down,
enough to really model form and stuff?
oh sure, yeah. I mean,
Really?
how long do you need? Do you need
Well,
like
an
when you?
hour or two?
Yeah, yeah.
Really?
I'd say another thing that is challenging for oil to acrylic painters is when you're painting with oil, often an oil painter is trying to add as little paint as possible so that it doesn't get messy on the surface. So you're not really loading it up to start with when you're blending. You're kind of building it up as you blend it. You're adding more oil paint. In an acrylic, if you start a little richer and you take it off as you're blending onto like a paper towel, you have more reservoir of wet paint. You have more time to work, and you're just kind of reducing that film thickness as you blend. And that
Hmm.
can be a really nice method to be a little bit more, I'm not saying glob, but a little more impasto or brushstroke rich initially, and then pull it off onto like a paper towel or something as you're blending. And that
Hmm.
can be a nice added trick.
So why do acrylics dry darker? Or depending on the value, why do they change in value?
Yeah, well, so fun fact, oil paints do it too. It's
I know,
just
but
a
it's
much
so much
lower.
less. Yeah.
It's so um it might be noticed less. So when we've done
Really?
color to color, yeah, wet to dry shift, it's pretty dramatic actually with the oil paints. It's just I'd say generally you're doing more complex um, blending, so you don't have that direct like from the tube to the canvas jarring thing. But absolutely, acrylics do dry darker, especially if you have a lot of gel or medium in them. Um, so there's a difference of refractive index. So the binder, clear acrylic polymer, is suspended in the water, and the water has a different refractive index. So it looks milky in the wet state because light goes in, it hits a polymer particle, it bounces out, it hits the water, it bounces back in, it scatters, kind of like how snow looks white even though ice is clear.
Mm-hmm.
It's got the different refractive
Oh,
indexes
that's a good
scattered around,
analogy.
right?
Yeah.
As that water leaves and those polymer particles coalesce, then the refractive index becomes 1 and it becomes clear. That whiteness of the snow now is a block of ice, and your value would go down. So if you have
So you
say
only
you
see
have,
pigment at that point. You're not seeing the whiteness of the refracting particles.
right, so you're not seeing the milkiness of the wet
Right.
state binder. And because that wet state is currently, with our best technology, white, it does tint things. So if you have a gel rich glaze, you can have a much more dramatic value shift. And vice versa, if you have a dark color like Diox purple, because it's so dark to start with, that the lightness from the milkiness is maybe more pronounced for a wet to dry shift than in a lighter value color where there's just, they're more similar in value to start with.
Right. But it seems like the lighter ones get darker and the darker ones get lighter, though, right? Or is that just gouache?
Well, gouache is its own, that's its own thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, gouache is
gouache.
its own thing.
Okay.
I
And you
think
don't
in
do gouache, so I
acrylics,
won't.
in acrylics, I would say generally you're going to have just a drop in the value
Oh, okay.
overall, and it'll be noticed more in the darker colors. Um,
Yeah, gouache is a nightmare because you never know what it's going to do. Like, at least
yeah,
that's how I feel when I'm doing it. I'm like, constantly.
yeah. I mean, gouache. So we don't make a gouache. We make the So Flat paints, which is a very matte acrylic paint, but it's not resoluble. A lot of people who like gouache really like the So Flat. Um, Also, in core, the titanium white is really amazing as a white. If you compare it to other watercolor whites, it's really cool.
Does
If
it
you
make
add
the
a touch of,
watercolor kind of like gouache?
exactly, if you add some of the white to your watercolor, because core has these really great film formation, thick build properties, you can use the core as a gouache with the white added, and it's beautiful. I mean, you can use it out of the tube with just a little bit of water and paint opaquely, and you'll have like super rich colors. Or you
Hmm.
can add a little bit of white if you want. Gouache usually has some more of a pastel quality to it, right? So if you
Yeah.
compare like wash ultramarine to just an ultramarine out of the tube of a watercolor, the gouache one's going to be lighter because they've had a little bit of either cal carb or other solids added to it. Adding
Hmm.
a touch of the white core to either core watercolors and painting it thick and opaque, it's beautiful.
So let's say I wanted to start using core watercolors as opposed to gouache. What is the difference? Or is there even a
Well, yeah, I
noticeable
mean,
difference?
core is a very unique watercolor system. So most watercolors made with gum arabic as a binder, which is a natural tree sap. Um, it has a long history of use. Years ago in conservation, they were using this polymer called Aquazol to do consolidation, fills, and some end painting in fine art restoration. And one of those conservators brought the material to us and said, Golden should really consider doing something with this. And so we took a look at it, and out of that, it was actually my project. I developed core watercolors, and we got a patent on that system because it's so different from standard watercolors. Um,
Not just
Basically,
the white, but all of it? All the
all of it.
watercolor
Yeah.
pigments are different? Okay.
Well, the pigments are pigments. The
The
binder
paints.
system, the
Right.
paints are different and has different attributes. And so, one of the most amazing things about the core is if you paint it thickly, that more watercolor artists are wanting to do. They're getting a little jealous of other media they're leaving some of those traditional glazing techniques, painting more impasto type stuff. Traditional gum arabic watercolors tend to crack over time in thicker films, sometimes crack and flake off, where the core has just fantastic film stability in thicker
Really?
film. Yeah.
So when you're using core, you're squeezing it wet out of the tube then. You're not using pans.
We make some pans. That's a newer offering for us, so we haven't really fully expanded the pan selection. So we have a number of different sets of pans. Many artists like working that way, but generally it's around a tube system.
Okay.
Some artists will squeeze that out, let it dry on a palette, and they comment about how lovely it is to resolubilize. So that's cool too.
Right, but if you want to build up body, you need to work wet, I would assume.
It's way easier. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you can just bring it out of the tube, add as little water as you want, and paint a thick one pass opaque layer if you want. It's very highly pigmented, and we don't really put fillers in it. It's highly biased. I think it's a great watercolor.
Yeah. So what would you say are the biggest differences between it and standard watercolors?
Yeah, I mean, so the biggest differences are that film stability, film flexibility in thicker films.
Okay.
But then the ease of rewetting is certainly something that many artists have commented on. The binder itself has less color than a natural gum arabic binder. And so that makes for a whiter white, a more yellow. And in general, how we're processing the pigments make it a very clean, rich, bright watercolor. And so people often comment on how much, more lively it is as far as in use. It will go, bloom very lively into wet passages. So if you want dynamic wet to wet techniques, that can be really interesting, as well as the colors are just super bright and pigmented. I always talk about it like a stereo. Like you can get a stereo where you can turn it up really loud if you want to listen to music super loud, or you can still sound good super quiet. But if you don't have that ability, you can't dial it into where you want it. And yeah, they're just a really great system that it seems like as the word's getting out there, we're seeing a lot more artists converting over from more traditional watercolors. And the conservators love them. They're just, at every conservation symposium I go to, they're super thrilled to have them in their arsenal as well. They use them to repair other paintings like oil paintings and
I thought you couldn't put water-based paint on top of oil.
Well, it's not for what you're thinking of. So this is more for in painting. So they'll do a isolation layer to separate the touch up. So say you have a hole in an old oil painting. They would first do a fill, some kind of polymeric fill. Then they would do an isolation layer of some kind of something very
to keep the oil from the water.
And to keep it from staining, because in conservation, anything you do, you need to be able to undo. And then they might come in at the end and do some watercolor touch up. So on objects conservators, painting conservators, they love the core watercolor. And it just shows how stable they believe they are as well, which is really nice street cred.
Man, you're really selling this stuff. You got me wanting to switch to watercolor now. It sounds cool.
Yeah. Not a salesperson. That's not my role.
I know, but the way you're talking about it, I know you're not selling it literally, but you are. So what are there, aside from watercolor paper, are there alternative surfaces that work well with your product?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a growing field. Watercolorists, I believe, are getting a little tired of the stigma of work on paper. You're making a painting equally as good or better than something in oil or acrylics or whatever. And just because it's simply on paper and framed, it's not considered of the same tier. And
Right.
so they're starting to look at unique surfaces, ways to expand. So within our product offering, we make different grounds that offer the ability to make your watercolor surface as big as you want. You could paint, 8 foot by 12 foot watercolor painting if you want, because you
No
can prepare
kidding.
a canvas with something like our absorbent ground that will give it that absorbency. Or
That's
we
pretty
make
brilliant.
we make a cold press ground, which looks like cold press paper
No
fiber. So
way.
you smear it out and it gives you that textural, and you can make it any shape or size you
And
want.
it absorbs washes just like watercolor
Pretty cool.
paper.
It's nothing's just like watercolor
Right.
paper, but it's
Okay.
pretty exciting.
But it's pretty
It's
cool.
exciting. It's very cool. And so, that gives the artist all of a sudden who was formerly stuck with this sheet of paper that they could work at any scale. And then also we work with a lot of artists who work on either materials we don't make. So one, like that frosted mylar, you can get a frosted mylar, something like Duralar. The core watercolors adhere very well to it. Acrylics adhere well to it. And then that can be glued to a panel or even floated for translucent effects. And so
Hmm.
artists really like how the water sits on top and moves around. Then it dries down. You have this kind of glowing, translucent surface. And then you can adhere that to a cradle or float it in front of another painting where you have a two painting effect. And we're just seeing lots of expansion in that kind of experimental substrate area.
I
So
wouldn't have
it's
thought
definitely,
acrylic would have stuck, or I'm sorry, watercolor would have stuck to Duralar. That's good to know.
yeah, certainly, all of our testing is really around the core's attributes. But certainly other artists are using more traditional watercolors on those surfaces.
Right.
We
Okay. So, right.
tested the other brands.
All right. That's good to know. Yeah. So I am, so I tried make sure that I'm only depending on it if I'm using your brand cores, because you can't necessarily vouch for the other brands.
Or test. We're always suggesting to test. If you're going to do something,
Yeah.
test it first. But science mind.
Right. Right. Okay. Man. So what's next for you guys? Do you have I know a lot of this is probably top secret, but is there anything you can tell us for what's next for Golden Paints and all of your
Yeah.
other companies?
Um, I will say the most exciting things we're working on I can't talk about, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, it's I know there's some imminent exciting things coming. Pan Pastel is our most recent acquisition. And so there's some cool stuff coming for that line in the future. But because of where my mind is and I'm always working, 3 to 5 years in advance. So I'm um, always hesitant to talk about, specifics because I don't know what we've already said or what we're about to say.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, maybe you could give us a little tour of your website. How do you feel about that?
Oh, sure.
And tell us that we've already talked about some of your products, but this
Yeah.
is the core stuff. Oh,
Yeah.
there's some pans, but
Yeah.
typically it comes in these tubes.
Yeah. 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 I mean, it's certainly, we have lots of great information on our website there, as well as we have a related website, which is justpaint.org, where we have additional information on our products, as well as in regards to core, we have all of the light fastness test, not only listed, but also posted with images. Um, so if you search in the search bar for like core light fastness, QR, and let's see what shows up.
Whoops, I spelled that wrong. I'm not a typer here. Oh, this is cool.
Yeah, so certainly there's lots of information you can go down and um, within one of those articles, there's the actual images of the test. So we give you both the numbers, but then you can look at each color and how it did and I'm pleased to say that it looks amazing.
That looks real. This is the core?
That is about ASTM oil paint light fastness testing. Go down just
my
a little
bad.
below.
Because that's really opaque looking.
What's right below that? Yeah, click on that article.
Can I just, okay.
And now go down to the bottom and click on any color up a little higher. Yeah, pick a color.
All right, I'll pick one of my favorite colors. Let's see, I love purple. Well,
Right?
it's not purple.
So there you have,
whatever. Close enough.
there you have on the left side, you have dilutions with water. So we start at 10 parts water to 1 part color, all the way down to 50 parts water, 1 part color. On the right side, we've done it with white, so you get that gouache-like quality.
Man, it's still really pretty high chroma.
It's pretty high chroma, right? And then you see how there's that little square that's cut out and that's stuck back in?
Oh, right here? Yeah, what's that?
Yeah, that's the part that went through the exposure chamber. So that's
Get
what it
out
looks
of
like.
Town.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
Right. So it's really nice for the artist because the numbers, if I post those numbers, it doesn't mean much to an artist. But here I like to that we can show any color, you can pick it and you can see exactly what testing does. And it's, it's right next to itself. So you can see down even in that 50 parts water to 1 part pigment, 1 part paint, is very little change after blasting it in the UV chamber for the equivalent of 100 years.
Would adding more water typically make it more prone to change? Is that why that's
the analogy I use is if you cut down a couple trees in a forest, it doesn't really, you don't see a lot. But if you go to New York City, you cut down a couple trees, people say, hey, where'd that tree go? As you dilute paint further and further down, you're basically leaving the forest and going into the city. You just have less pigment particles. So even if a few are changing, it would feel like more of a change.
You're great with analogies. I love that. That's a good analogy.
I want to show you back on the other website, the Golden Paints website. I want to show you another cool thing that we did recently. So if you go up to resources,
okay,
and then you see paint mixer, and then for you, go to oil paint mixer new, that one. Okay, so we work with basically we created a math model. So we did a huge database. The work behind this is wild, but basically you can come in here, create a login for yourself, Jeff, that you would then say, I have these tubes of oil paint in my studio. And let's make believe you've done that. So do you see where it says palette and it currently says base palette or something like that?
Yeah.
There's a little drop down on that. And let's go down to single pigment. Is there something like that?
Basic pigment set 1. Landscape set. Oh, wait, there's a. No, I don't see single pigment.
No, landscape set's fine. Let's do landscape set. That's absolutely fine. And now, do you see where there's that little picture of the barn down there to the bottom right? Yeah, let's click on that. So this would be like, imagine you uploaded a reference image.
Okay, I'm gonna get in a little tighter here.
Yeah, I think that'd be helpful for sure. Yeah, sweet. That helps me on my side also. All right. Let's just click somewhere in that image. Say you wanted to learn to match that color. You see where it says target match? Above your cursor, down a little lower, right there. Yeah, it says up a little higher. That says target and then match.
Oh, just target. I was looking for it. They're 2 different colors, so it threw me. Okay, got it.
Click that.
Okay.
Boom.
Shut up. It's like the Home Depot paint mixing machine.
It's right. So it's using within the color set you're in, right? So it's saying, okay, what I see here is it's saying, okay, within these tubes you have in your studio, you can't quite get here, but here's as close as we're going to get for you.
What? This is amazing.
And then it shows you what that color looks like as well as mixes with white. So let's go back to the.
Wait, I got to ask you a question though. Did you do all this with actual paint and then make notes and then digitize it? or is there some sort of algorithm that figures this out?
So what we did is we took each color and we mixed it with a bunch of steps of white and then one with black. So we get the tide lines of the spectral curves. And then, so we did that for every color. So the algorithm knows if you mix burnt sienna with white, this is what it does.
Okay.
And then it can look at all the others, and it can take a curve and match that curve. And so then it's converting from RGB to say, okay, within this math model, how would I get you to that? So fortunately, it'd be
it's
impossible.
half analog, half digital.
Right. So the database that it runs off of is all analog from actual paint and, you know,
Amazing.
thousands,
but only with white though. But only with white. And then
white and black. And then you can, because of some other coloristic research that's been around for many years, there's math models you can build out of it.
Wow, that's amazing. Why black though? Because artists don't use black very much. Well, that's not true. A lot of artists do, but many don't.
It gives just a dramatic data set. So we only match it, we mix it with a tiny bit of black, and it just kind of shows what happens when you neutralize it down.
Okay.
You can think of, you know, blacks are kind of blues in their own weird way. They tend to be a little more cool.
Yeah.
And so it's just affecting the different part of the spectrum than the white. So click something else on that picture, and then hit match. And so that's really useful. So that's in parts, right?
It's funny. That's exactly what I would have picked up.
Right. And if you wanted to say that wasn't quite right, you're like, well, I like it. You can click left or right on those arrows on the tube. Like, yeah. Like if you wanted less yellow in there or more yellow or more whatever.
And oh my gosh, that is crazy.
Yeah. So this is really useful.
Dude, and once you guys must be so proud of this.
Oh, it's really great. And, yeah, it's a nice balance between usefulness for someone who's not great at color matching, but also someone who is good at color matching, but maybe just wants to zone out and get ballpark starting points. And then let me show you one more thing on there. So let's match that blue, for example.
Okay.
And feels like a decent match to me for that blue.
Yeah.
And it's saying, you know, right where your cursor is, you see where it says CIE distance is 0.93. That's less than 1 delta. That means really great match. If you saw that with an exclamation point, it'd be like, I can't get there with these pigments you have. You know, you might want some other tubes of paint. Once again, you can upload your actual tubes in your studio, so that it's not sending you to the store unless you want to go to the store. And that is really nice.
This is too freaking cool.
And if you go to above that match on the right side where it says mix result, so the blue all the way to the right side, past the tubes, and up, there's a little eye icon to the right of that. Yeah, if you click on that, it brings up that weight ratio. And that's really useful. If you get a cheap digital scale, you could put on, say, those gram amounts of those paints and mix it, and it'd be highly reproducible to do that each time.
You know where this would be amazingly useful? If you're doing, oh my gosh, I could have killed for something like this years ago when I was doing these huge color fields in paintings, because I would waste so much paint trying to match. Let's say, so I would do a figure on a big color field. Let's say it was like in front of a big sort of pink square that's like 5 feet by 3 feet, and it has to be exactly the same color. But then I need a second coat. And as you said, oil paint technically does change color a little bit, and it's so frustrating. But you could literally weigh out your formula the first day and use the exact same weight a week later and get the exact same color. Is it just me or the rest of you guys also get weirdly excited when you order new paint? Because I don't know about you, but when I get paint in the mail, it feels like Santa just dropped my Christmas presents off at my doorstep. With Vasari paint, my paint of choice and the podcast sponsor, it's even more exciting. And let me show you why. Because when Vasari shows up, it comes in this incredible box where each tube lays in this little compartment perfectly formed around the tube in this nice soft foam. And it's surrounded by velvet, red velvet. Now you got to ask yourself, if a paint comes so carefully protected and surrounded by red velvet, you got to wonder if this paint is worthy of royalty. It is. Vasari is. So if you haven't tried Vasari, you're seriously missing out. And the thing about Vasari, it's not only the best paint out there, it's also made by an incredible company that's been around for 30 years and knows its customer by name. Do yourself a favor, go to vasaricolors.com and order yourself some for your next painting.
Yeah, and that would work with any time you're mixing paint. So if you wanted to just use a scale when you're mixing, and you say you're making larger amounts of paint for your little foil envelopes, and you keep a little logbook of this swatch equals these things, 20 years later, you say, oh yeah, I can make that color again.
Yeah, like if you have a favorite color that you made up. I used to do that, tube paints. That's brilliant. This is too cool.
Yeah. So we have this one for oil. We have one for acrylics. And they both have their own database behind it. And it's certainly something that, I encourage people to play with. And let me take you through, since we're talking about it. So the center tab up there.
Color system?
Color system. And you have palette builder. So color system, sometimes someone might want to just enter, say they're working in a program like Illustrator and they have an RGB value or CMYK value. They wanted to enter something in. They could do that there.
Wow.
And then if you go to palette builder.
Wait, let me just, so that was already a match. Okay. So it's for this. Okay.
So if you just change the RGB numbers to something random where it's like RGB, you just type something different, pick a number and then click match.
Okay.
Boom. So this is a great example where it's saying, hey, you're trying to get me somewhere we can't go with the paints you have.
Oh,
right?
Gotcha.
No matter what you do in this palette, because you're in the landscape palette, you just want more colors. So if you click out a landscape palette to just like all colors, and then click match now. Same
match, sorry.
Yep. Now it's saying, oh, we're getting a lot closer with Egyptian Violet King's Blue. We're still, that's within that color space is also a really tricky color space.
Yeah, I beat the system paint already in my first try. How about that?
It's okay. It's really great to see it that way because it shows, light from a screen versus paint that's taking light in and reflecting it back. But it's going to tell you where you're able to, like this one, it's saying, yeah, you can get there. It's saying we're at 1 point. I can't quite see the value,
7.5.
but 175. So that's a pretty good match for that space, right?
But this is reality. In real life, I can't tell you how many times there's just a color that just can't be mixed.
There's certain areas you can't mix, and that's where the fluorescents come in, right?
Yeah.
They're not light fast, but they allow you to get to some other areas.
Mm-hmm.
And so now let's click on the palette builder. So this would be like if you go from all colors now down, like on the palette, you can.
Wow! So is this your entire library of colors?
It's the entire Williamsburg line, right? So if you had, if you select a palette like we were before from that palette drop-down menu at the top.
Okay. Yeah. So let's do signature colors.
Okay. Now that's the colors in that palette, right? So
no, I don't like that palette. It's too gray. Let's try a different one. Modern color set. Let's do that. There we go.
Yeah. So say this was what you had in your studio. Great. Or you bought that set because you wanted to try Williamsburg handmade oils. Or also when you sign up, this would be where you would add your, personal palettes. Like say you're working on a portrait project and you wanted to use, these 6 tubes of paint. You would just create that project's palette. And you can have as many personal palettes as you wanted because it's your login.
Yeah, this is a great resource. How'd you guys come up with this?
Well, we had an older version, which is still available because some users were using it, but we've improved the math model. We added the oil paint one, and then we allowed it now to be, before it would only work off of all paints or single pigments or what have you. And the challenge there is if you don't have that tube, you can't tell it, just limit it to these.
Right.
So with this new rebuild, having that ability to actually say what's in your studio makes it really a useful day-to-day tool.
Yeah, and it is important to, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but this will only work for the Williamsburg paints, but it'll probably get pretty close if you're using similar colors with a different brand.
Yeah, the tint strength's going to be different. It will all get you in the ballpark.
Yeah.
And it's free, right? So
yeah.
I think that's pretty cool. We didn't stick it behind a paywall.
Yeah, it is really cool. That's great, man. So is there anything else really cool like that here that you could show us? Kind of hard to beat that.
Really cool. But if you go to like products and go down to let's see, what are we on? Oil colored grounds, other brands. Go to golden acrylics, maybe there. And then, so you just jump between the oil paint page and the acrylic page. And then under products now, let's go to like, look at all the colors. I guess down here it says, click on the heavy body acrylics on the left there. This will show you our virtual color chart of all the stuff. But if you click on each of those colors.
What are the bands for?
It's for opacity, right? So it's a black and white.
Oh.
And so in the lab, we have black and white drawdown cards for looking at opacity. This would be like, we have that on our tube. We do hand-painted swatches on everything. But if you click on one of those, any color.
Just to be clear, so this is a more opaque yellow versus this one. Okay.
Absolutely. Yep. Okay. So click on any color.
Let's see. There we go.
Then that brings up an actual paint out. Well, it's a picture of a paint out where you have the color as applied over black and white, so you can see the opacity. And then talking about glazes, you can see 1 equal parts with medium, with 10 parts medium, and then the tints. So before you go pick something up to try it, you can say, what's this color gonna do in, is this exciting or not, right? So it's just a really nice way to get a lot more information about a color before you were to pick it up.
Yeah,
right?
This is great. Well, that one's pretty transparent. Yeah, that's good. This is great. This is great information. Huh.
Yeah. So,
okay.
Yeah,
all right. And this is all at goldenartistcolors.com for those who are listening.
Yeah.
Everything is there that we've looked at. So, well, this has been fun, man. So I got to ask you one more thing. Can you show us a little bit of your art?
Yeah, sure. I haven't updated my website in ages.
What about Instagram? You got an Instagram?
Instagram. That's actually interesting. Yeah, go to let's see, was it Ulysses Jackson Alchemist?
That's great. That sounds familiar. Maybe it's just because your name, but it sounds familiar. All right.
So, talk about all over the place.
How do you spell Ulysses again?
So Ulysses.
Ulysses Jackson. That's such a great name. So much more interesting than Jeff.
And I think I see me there. There I am. So all the things I do, painting wise,
very cool.
Where I was doing some duplicates. That's my dog's eye.
Awesome. In what medium?
That's an oil.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been noodling with oil recently. I was doing a lot with ceramics and sculpture and
Oh, you're all
all
over the
kinds of
place.
stuff. Oh,
This
I'm
is
all over the
cool.
place. Yeah. Things
You
I'm
do
interested
woodworking
in.
too?
I do. And actually, the most recent thing at the top is some of the woodworking I've been doing. Like if you go all the way up, that
You
spoon,
making
I just
spoons?
made a nice little spoon.
I've done that too. I've made a big old ladle for my wife. It's
The
fun.
branch, you see that tree branch is a
Yeah.
before and after. So I made that, and then there's a
Wait,
commission
wait, wait,
for a
wait, wait.
friend.
You made a tree branch? I'm
No,
confused.
click the next over. Click the
Oh.
part 2 that post.
What the? Wait. Which part is the pipe part? I'm so
That's
confused. Is that
so
right
if
here?
you cut it, yeah, that's that part, and then I use some of the branch for the stem as well.
Dude, that is
So
sick. Is it functional?
it is, yeah. The person does healing work and plant medicine, so they needed it for tobacco.
How did you
Um,
get a long hole at a curve all the way down the middle?
well, the great thing about ash is it has a hollow pith, so you can
Oh, it
actually just
does?
burn it out. Yep.
You burn it out.
Yeah.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Dude,
So
that
that
is
was I
cool.
just finished that. Yeah. And
Dude,
yeah, all the things.
Dude, you live in New Jersey. If you lived in Utah, we'd have to hang out. I love
So yeah.
building stuff. This is great.
And then for artwork, the old stuff is on ulyssesjackson.com.
Let's see.
And I stopped showing professionally, maybe 2016. So,
Oh, it's been a while.
yeah, I only paint for myself now. But if you go there and you go to paintings and archives, there's
Oh, interesting.
stuff.
You're doing all kinds of stuff. These are cool.
Yeah. Yeah, those are big. Those were like 4 by 6 foot, 5 by 6 type things. And
Those are nice.
yeah, kind of fake collage type stuff. And then in archives, it goes all over the place,
Yeah, you got some nice work. But you're not really selling anymore. You're just doing it and you're just hoarding paintings or what?
Yeah, just doing like that one your cursor's over. That's a good one where someone would be like down in the bottom center.
Right
That's
here.
one where someone would be like, is that oil or what is that?
And what is it? Acrylic?
It's all acrylic, yeah.
Yeah, these are cool. Man, this has been fun.
Yeah.
You got some nice work too. So,
Thanks.
all right. So, is there anything else that, you'd like to share with the audience before I let you go?
Been a super pleasure. So thanks for giving me a nice break in my day from lab stuff. So I'll get back to it.
Man, it's been great for me. This has been fun.
Super fun. And so, yeah, thanks for the experience. Glad we synced up. And
yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. It's good to see you.
Yeah, have a good one.
You too. Thanks for tuning in to the Undraped Artist Podcast. If you enjoyed it, subscribe. And if you could, leave a comment or review. That really helps the channel. Please share the show with your friends, and if you're feeling generous, consider a monthly donation at theundrapedartist.com. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you next week.